Hello students, welcome again to World Civ 2. This is a podcast covering the PowerPoint presentation concerning revolution, the topic of revolution. We've got two revolutions that we want to talk about. We're going to talk about very briefly the American Revolution. Now, if you were hoping for a detailed analysis of the American Revolution, we're not going to go through that in this class, primarily because we have an American history class which covers the Revolution in greater detail. What I want to look at in terms of the American Revolution is to kind of give you an idea and have you think about how it fits into the European trend that was going on at the same time, which has to do with not only constitutionalism and the ideals of constitutionalism, but also the impact that it had upon European politics and European life. So, if we take a look at the American Revolution period, the colonial period as it's called, we first, what I want to highlight is, and you'll see it on the PowerPoint, you'll see the mention of what's called the 7 Years' War. And the 7 Years' War is probably not a name that a lot of American history people, history buffs are aware of. We primarily refer to it as the French and Indian War in American history. But it was actually, the French and Indian War was part of a larger conflict that world historians call the 7 Years' War, which was a war fought between primarily the four powers of England, France, obviously on opposite sides, Austria, and Prussia. And the way that that war kind of concluded was with the victory of the British side. And with the victory of the British, it had dramatic effects upon American history, in that in the aftermath of that war and the treaty that followed, the French were forced to give up a lot of their North American possessions to the British. And that then opened up new opportunities for English colonists, which then kind of precipitated a situation in which those extra opportunities and the increased revenue generated was a tempting stream of revenue for the British government. And so in the aftermath of the 7 Years' War, what we see in American history or American colonial dealings with the mother country of England is we see an increase in terms of taxation. And as that continued, of course, we have the famous phrase, no taxation without representation, which would echo and connect to a growing constitutionalism that was building in England, and it actually had been building in England for over a century. If you look at the previous lecture topic of constitutionalism, you'll see that by 1688, in the Glorious Revolution, that England had achieved a constitutional monarchy. And the most supreme power, political power in the English state was the Parliament. And so if we take that knowledge and we apply it to the American expression, which we got to remember, most of the American colonists, or the so-called English colonists, were from England and were familiar with the ideas of John Locke and the ideas of the rights of individuals and property owners to have a say in their government. And so the American Revolution continued to spin out of control for the British side in the face of that established intellectual trend of constitutionalism in Mother England. And so eventually, of course, as we all know, those two sides eventually erupted into war in the American Revolution, and eventually the American Revolutionary was successful for the American colonists. The effects that the American Revolution had upon England, very dramatic, in that England now focused a lot of its efforts and resources in maintaining its overseas empires, predominantly in India. The second front that happened also was that in the course of the American Revolution, the French government funded and participated in terms of sending supplies as well as military advisors to the American colonial side. And the aftermath of the American Revolution, which ends in 1781, is an increased economic strain on France, having to make up or deal with the loss of that revenue that they spent in helping the Americans. And so you cannot talk about the French Revolution without also talking about the American Revolution, because they're very closely tied in both cause and effect. The American Revolution is a direct cause for the French Revolution, And also, the French were starting to realize and start to hope and aspire for that constitutionalism that they saw evidenced first in England and now in America. And so the American Revolution very clearly leads us to a discussion of the French Revolution. Now, the main difference between the two, however, is that the thinkers and leaders of the French Revolution were dramatically impacted by the social ideology of the Enlightenment also. And so what happens in terms of the French Revolution is we have a merging of revolutions in the sense of a political revolution and a social revolution. And as a result, the French Revolution, unlike the American, begins to spin out of control of its leaders, and it kind of breaks down into a very unstable and terror-filled region of France, primarily around Paris and in the local countrysides surrounding Paris, as the revolutionaries become more radical and more extreme. So keep that in mind as you take a look at the PowerPoint slide of the French Revolution, how there are some similarities to the American Revolution, but also how there are differences as the social program, as the Enlightenment thinkers of the French Revolution try to implement not only a political change, but a social change. And that brings us to one of the last phases of the French Revolution, which is Napoleon. Now, Napoleon is a very interesting figure because he has to deal with trying to lock down that social change to provide more stability for the French people, especially in the aftermath of the Reign of Terror. But at the same time, he is an idealist when it comes to the ideals of the French Revolution. And so what we have is we have almost a dichotomy between Napoleon in France and Napoleon abroad. And what I mean by that is pretty simple. Napoleon will implement the Napoleonic Code, which is a liberal law code, which espouses the liberal ideals of freedom before the law, equality for all before the law. There's just one exception. When it comes to the Napoleonic Code, since Napoleon made it, it doesn't apply to him. So while it is a liberal idea, it is also an opposite, excuse me, it is the opposite of the liberal idea in that it's a law code that does not apply specifically to Napoleon himself, the elite. And that Napoleonic Code was then transferred and implemented and enforced in the countries that France controlled at the time, parts of Austria and parts of Prussia. So as we look at the complex event, as you look at the PowerPoint slides about the French Revolution, it is an extremely complex event. It is a merging of social and political revolutions. It goes through 5 major phases, each with its own implementation of a new government system. And ultimately, and this is I think most important, ultimately the French Revolution results in a complete return to what France was like before it began. And as a result, we also have, if you're paying attention to the next lecture topic, which is the isms, we have the spread of liberalism at the beginning of the French Revolution, and at the end of the French Revolution, with its termination, we see the implementation of a new ideology, which is quite an old ideology, which is called conservatism, which is the desire to avoid change. It's a desire to maintain the status quo and to maintain traditional values and society. And so the French Revolution presents a nice window to see the impact of liberal ideas, as well as the reaction to those liberal ideas if they go too far, with basically having a situation where we have a return to traditional political and social structure. Thank you.